Welcome to Fostering Solutions, a podcast that uplifts people and enterprises making positive impact in communities around the world. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Foster. Well, my guest today is Errol Randle. Errol, how are you doing today?
I am doing wonderful, Dr. Foster. How are you?
Good. Thanks for coming on Fostering Solutions. I've known you now. It's been, maybe 10 years. I can't even.
Yes.
Time is just zooming by.
It is.
Back in my Kisser days, and then continued to work with you in my current position. But tell the audience about yourself. You're very well known in our community, but go ahead and tell the audience about yourself. Who is Errol Randle?
Thank you, Dr. Foster. And before I start, may I say it's an honor for me to be here on your podcast. And I've seen your lineups before, and I'm not sure if I'm worthy, but
a diverse mix.
That's right. It's a diverse mix, but I'm excited to be here to kind of tell my story and talk about what I'm doing and some of the things that have worked in my line of business. But I am Errol Randle, born and raised in Indiana. So I'm a transplant to West Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And so people ask me all the time, how did you get to West Virginia? And I was stationed in Oklahoma, Enid, Oklahoma, at a pilot training base with another gentleman who is a retired police officer as well from here in Charleston by the name of George Henderson. So we were police officers in the Air Force, and we both had dreams of getting out and to getting into law enforcement. So he had an extra application. And he said, man, it would be cool if we could work together. So he handed me the application from out of his window into mine. And this was a Wednesday. I filled out the application, had to have it to Charleston by Friday. So our next day mailed it on Thursday, called on Friday. They said they had received it. And then we came out and tested. And so it was one of the best moves I could ever made. 25 years later, I retired from Charleston Police Department, having served a wonderful police department in a great city. And so born and raised in Indiana, came to Charleston after the Air Force, served 25 years. I'm the father of the light of my life, who is Kennedy Randle, who's the 16-year-old Hurricane High School student, cheerleader, I must say, because she's going to watch this. And so recently retired in 2019, currently work for the state of West Virginia as the community outreach officer for the Department of Military Affairs and Public Safety, as well as I work also with the Department of Education, Jobs and Hope, West Virginia. So in short, real quick, that was my bio. Okay.
So when you think about your career, you haven't had that many jobs, but what was your career journey like? Were there obstacles you had to overcome? What was that? Because 25 years, I think you're still relatively young to be talking about retire, but at least, you're still working. But what has that journey been like for you in your career, from the Air Force, to being with the police department? Obstacles what would you like to share about that journey?
Sure. Of course, there were always obstacles. Being a police officer is a very hard career field, but it was one that was always a dream for me. And you'll hear a lot of police officers say, it was a calling for me. And it was truly a calling for me. I knew ever since second grade that I was going to be a police officer.
Okay.
And matter of fact, what spurred that was we were having career day at Francis Slocum Elementary School. And in through that door, into my classroom came my father, who is a retired police officer, he and his partner. And when he walked through that door, Dr. Foster, it was like a scene from a movie. It was like smoke came through the door, and then he walked through the smoke, and boom, there he was, my superhero. But the pride that I had in knowing what he represented was something that I aspired to be involved in. And so I carried myself accordingly because, service was something that was taught early to me in my life, how honorable it is to serve. And so I was able to watch my dad, but not just my dad, but my brother, my sister's husband, uncles. And so
A
not just
lot of
my immediate.
cops. Okay.
Yeah. So we just passed the torch to the third generation of police officers in the Randle family. And then also, the Air Force. The Air Force was something that was part of our family legacy. But once I made that leap into law enforcement, made the decision to go ahead and serve on the civilian side, I knew what I was getting into. I knew, but I didn't know. I knew that it was going to be challenging, but I felt that I had a good head start, which I did. It was just amazing to me to watch my dad interact with people. Didn't know matter who they were, where they were from, what their economic status was, what the color of their skin was. He had an innate ability to be able to communicate at a high level. And so that's what I wanted. That's what I aspired to do, and that's what I aspired to be. And so once I got started, that was really something that I really built upon. So as I went through my career, I served the first 2 years of my career in the patrol division, where those first 2 years are very important for you to learn as much as possible, learn the ins and outs, learn the rules, learn the laws, and how to, interact with folks. But I had some great training officers, but there were challenges. There's not a lot of diversity here in West Virginia. And being a one of very few Black police officers, there was a pressure that I think that was a little different. He had
Pressure
some
from the inside or pressure from
from
you
both,
as a man, a Black man, or pressure from the outside?
all the above.
All of the above. Okay.
All the above. As one of very few Black officers, you always felt as though you were under a microscope. And that's the way I carried myself accordingly, because I always want to make sure I carried myself in a manner that didn't affect the next Black officer coming after me from having a chance at different opportunities within. And so I always was very conscious of that. Not to say that it was a challenge, but it was something I was very conscious about. And then there were times that, there were, this is a very minute, small number that I did receive flack from some folks in the Black community because of my role. And, but, that I knew that was going to be part of it because I watched my dad. I had that example ahead of me. So I knew how to navigate that within. And so that didn't become an issue either. So there were challenges, but the rewards truly outweigh what the challenges were. That feeling that you get from truly helping someone navigate a difficult situation is something you can't put money on.
Right. So, you mentioned your family history. Did you know you were gonna? Is 25 years a typical length of a cop career, or is it? It's like, did you know going in at 25 years I'm done? Was that a plan, or did it, like, what prompted you to say, okay, this is it? Was there a moment like that?
Great question. I will say on the front end, I started off at age of 24. And I think that was
pretty young. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was a great age to start. And actually it's to me, it's still wild in my mind that someone can become a police officer at the age of 18. Wow. I still think it's too young. You don't have enough life experience and to be able to navigate different, situations that you're going to encounter. So once I started at that age and had the military behind me again, I was a little more mature at that age. And so I think that would help me early on to be able to navigate. But as I went through my career, I think what really kept me excited about my job were the opportunities within. So again, I talked about having served 2 years in patrol division. My next assignment, I was in the street crimes unit. So as a young man, I was able to work the undercover role, and so it was just a different world. Working in uniform and working in plain clothes, you see just totally different world.
Wow.
Yes. So that kept me motivated, but I also began to learn and really, wanted to dig deeper as far as why people did what they did, or why they made the decisions they made, what outside influences were there that made those that influenced them in making certain decisions, and how could I serve better? How could I reach people and be effective? So many of these questions started to churn in my head, and those are the challenges we had, because as society moved at a very, very fast pace.
Okay. So I guess towards the latter part of your career, you did a lot of training of police officers. So can you think of a session that was most memorable and really stood out for you among all the ones that you did? It's like, is there a particular series or a particular session, a particular class that you did that really stood out, and why did it stand out, and how impactful do you think it was?
Yes. To backtrack just a bit, once I completed my tour with the street crimes unit, I went to the FBI gang task force, and then I was assigned to the chief's office by retired Chief Brent Webster. So we had a long 10 years together in which I worked directly for him, and my role was that of the strategic planning officer, where I was to develop initiatives and strategies to help, promote police community relations. So in that, we were introduced to a class called emotional intelligence. And man, oh man, that really sparked my interest. I mean, that once I saw and started to do a little homework about as far as what emotional intelligence was, and it's something that is more well known in the corporate America, because it helps businesses with their bottom dollar. They make more money if they have high emotional intelligence, and it's all about being able to have good communications and relationships with others. So as I dug into that, and I realized that there's an appraisal that is out there that we could take to help us understand where we are in terms of our own self-awareness, our self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. I was like, wow, that is what we need for law enforcement right now. So began to do a lot of research, and we talked about kicking that off with Charleston PD. Then I retired. But I then was hired by the state, and one of the things I introduced to the state was this notion of emotional intelligence. So it came up again. I was able to, with the help of Reverend Ron English, introduce this to the Charleston Police Department. And this was started in December of 2020. And we began, when I say we.
So that's in the middle of, that's in the middle of COVID?
Yes, or actually, yes, it was.
Okay.
Yes. And so, George Floyd happened. Everyone was in their emotions, including myself. And that was just the what I needed to really get me over the hump, to really push me to get this course of study out there. So we approached Charleston PD, and we taught a class. When I say we, it's Eddie Whitehead and myself. We taught a class called 21st Century Policing, Identifying Unconscious Biases, and Unlocking Emotional Intelligence. And it's a course that we developed ourselves, based off of the last 25 years I've had with the Charleston Police Department, what I've learned on emotional intelligence, and just how the Charleston Police Department operates. I know that because I was there.
Right.
And so to go back to answer your question, that what there was probably the most meaningful class that I've introduced as far as training, because we're already seeing dividends, positive dividends.
Right. And first, it seems like it affected you personally as well.
Yes, yes.
The attendees. Yeah.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I go back to day one, when I was a Charleston police officer. This is a tool that I wish I had
Wow.
day number one, because it's not just about being nice, but it's about having appropriate outcomes. That's what we're trying to achieve. And so we did it with Charleston PD, and the response from Charleston PD was off the chart.
Good.
These officers have really received it. And matter of fact, they really truly understood the divisiveness that unconscious biases can cause, what they are, how they operate in the subconscious level. And when you look at our police crews and it says to protect and serve, it doesn't say we're going to protect and serve only those people who look like us or have the same economic status of us. It's everybody. And so unfortunately, these biases can prevent the level of effectiveness in which we serve. Wow. So we introduced that, but we also give them a tool to help them to overcome, which is mastering their emotional intelligence. And so each officer that was with Charleston PD received their own individualized appraisal, and then they began to work on their own ways of improving where they were deficient. And this is all about their own self-awareness. So that went over so well that we began teaching at the police academy as well. So now we're teaching, we're at the police academy now. And since February of 2021, every officer that graduated, both either municipal or state police cadet that has graduated, has been taught emotional intelligence and has their own individualized emotional intelligence appraisal. So this is something
now indoctrinated. It's a part of the system now.
Yes, it's
awesome.
It's part of the core curriculum. And matter of fact, we created a statewide initiative called the West Virginia Law Enforcement Initiative, Project EQ, where our goal is to get this in the hands of every police officer in the state of West Virginia.
That's awesome.
So we kicked that off.
So it's almost like Charleston then would be like a pilot that then grows statewide. That is
exactly what is happening now. We're looking at statistics, and how emotional intelligence is playing a role with the way that we serve. And again, without going into statistics, we are seeing some trends in some areas such as use of force that are amazing.
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
So the people who wrote the book and developed the training, did they think of police officers as an audience? Like have you been in touch with them to let them know, hey, our police department is actually using this? I wonder if they realize that.
So here's the rest of the story.
Okay.
Because we are in contact with the developers of the book that we use, and they have thought about it, they've tried, but it hasn't happened yet until now. And so the state of West Virginia is leading the charge in law enforcement.
That's great to hear.
Emotional intelligence training. So we're working directly with the company. They have put major resources into it. Matter of fact, they hired a gentleman by the name of Dr. Greg Campbell, who is now their vice president of law enforcement and government.
Oh, look at that. Okay.
Yes. And matter of fact, when he was doing his doctorate dissertation, it was on emotional intelligence in law enforcement.
Okay. That's awesome.
So we are hitting the ground running. We're really very, very proud of our efforts here in West Virginia. Again, this is something we're proud of because of we're leading the charge.
Absolutely. It's good that we're leading. I like when we lead.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're excited and we're continuing to add different pieces to the puzzle. And
Mhm.
so things are coming together on a big scale.
It's wonderful to hear. Um, Another challenge that is being placed on police departments is really the whole mental health issues, the whole mental health challenge that we face as a nation. And police departments are being called upon to include mental health professionals, whatever their counselors, therapists, whatever it is, on their teams. Just so that, because I'm surprised at what I hear that, cops are called for just because there's no one else to handle it. So how do you see these mental health professionals being incorporated into day-to-day operations of a police department? It seems it makes sense to me. I know there's a whole movement to really um, include these professionals, because a lot of the folks that you guys are called on, that you were called on, that police officers are called upon. Lots of those situations are for people who have mental health issues. So how do you see, this really fitting into day-to-day operations of a police department?
Well, when we say working with the police, I don't necessarily envision those professionals being sitting in the car
Okay, so it
with
wouldn't be like sitting in the car going on a
no,
on a
that's not
call
the
with.
way I see it or the way I receive that.
Mhm.
But I do see it as this, that perspective. I call that social intelligence. That perspective right there is a different piece of the puzzle that we need to be effective, because who's going to be called in a situation where there may be a person that has a mental health issue?
Mhm.
99 out of 100 times is going to be the police. And for us to be able to have that piece of the puzzle or that perspective to be able to draw from
Mhm.
is what's going to allow us to be effective. So we have a beautiful thing called discretion.
Mhm.
And our use of discretion is successful as we have different perspectives to draw from. So, with that being said, I just think it's very important that police officers put a lot of time and effort into strategic planning for training. I just talked about bringing emotional intelligence training in, but there are also you know social intelligence classes that we need to draw from to help us to be effective. There are classes right now, and it's funny you say ask that question, because there are classes right now that we are recommending during our training that help us become proficient at our understanding our own, mastering our own emotional intelligence, but also to help us just to become a well-rounded police officer, have that social intelligence to be able to draw from. And mental health awareness is one of those classes. Because again, our emotional intelligence is going to put us in the mindset to help us understand and that whatever is in front of us, we truly understand what it is.
Mhm.
Having that social intelligence piece is going to allow us to draw and bring another piece of the puzzle to draw from to really help diagnose that as well. And then again, hopefully have appropriate outcomes. So, and if I may, I want to say this. Also in our class, there's an equation that we use. And because what we're trying to achieve in law enforcement now with that strategic planning for training is cultural competence. So emotional intelligence plus social intelligence for us helps to define our own cultural competence. So there are classes that I think are basic classes that are needed, that are mandatory, and that should be needed. And so we're looking at providing this blueprint to law enforcement, but classes such as, again, emotional intelligence, kinesics, that's the study of body language.
Mhm.
So it's very important as we communicate with folks that we understand what their body language is reading. There was a study by by UCLA that said that 55% of what is received while we communicate is through body language.
Mhm.
38% is how it's said, and then the remaining 7% is actually what is said. So knowing that, so how important is kinesics? Again, it overlaps with helping us to master our emotional intelligence, but also to help us become a well-rounded police officer. Fundamentals of drug addiction. We are the folks that are on a day-to-day basis are going to run across folks that have issues with drug addiction. So we have to make sure that our police officers have these different types of training, again, to be able to draw from. Special needs awareness, history of policing, race relations, diversity management. There's a quote by Stephen Covey, and I've said this a million times, but it is one of my all-time favorite quotes. Are we busy or are we effective? And we want to be effective each and every time that we make contact with someone. It's a challenge, but we want to be effective.
So you're saying it's important for officers to be well trained in a lot of these areas. And would there also be room to have whether it's a counselor, someone with a mental health related degree at working with the police officers? Because I'm sure whatever the trainings that you mentioned would be good, but having that professional who has spent 4-6 years studying that particular subject matter, to me, that would be more, someone who would be able to more expertly handle certain situations. Do you agree? Or
well, but I'll add something to that. Not just be well versed in that area, but also understand the culture of police and the culture of police departments. So very important, because it's a different animal.
Okay, so you're saying, hey, you would have the mental health person, but they also have to be trained
and understand the culture of policing,
right?
How we operate as a culture. And the truth is, the policing culture is one that's difficult to get into and to be able to influence. So yes, must be well versed in the subject matter area, but as well as must understand the culture of policing and how our internal customer service and how we receive internal customer service, because a lot of times police officers only receive from other police officers, and that's not necessarily a good thing.
Interesting. Yeah. So one thing that you've really been impactful, another area where I guess your community outreach, your community connections really started, was through a special project called Project West Invest. That has been very impactful on the west side of Charleston. Talk some about this particular initiative, the Project West Invest, that you initiated it,
Yes.
and you were one of the first participants. So talk some about Project West Invest.
Project West Invest was derived from a personal experience, and what it is the overall merits of it were to have police officers move into challenged neighborhoods on the west side of Charleston. And so when I go back and talk about my own personal experience, prior to living in the house that I live in now, which is a Project West Invest home, I actually lived in Orchard Manor. And for those folks that out there in Cyberland that don't know where Orchard Manor is, it's a government housing that is actually on the west side of Charleston. And when I came on in 1994, was one of the most crime-ridden areas of town. Matter of fact, for lack of better words, I cut my teeth as a young police officer in Orchard Manor because of the shooting investigations, the open air drug markets and things like that. And it has such a reputation that if you were just to mention the word Orchard Manor or the woo, the words that would come from folks' mouth were not positive. And so I had gone through a personal situation where I was going through a divorce, and I ended up living in Orchard Manor for 10 years. But what I realized was when I moved into Orchard Manor, I had these things that were these unconscious biases and they were in my mind that I actually had to overcome. And this is just real talk, such as, you know, that people in government housing didn't want to work. People that in government housing didn't like the police. People that lived in government housing didn't appreciate family. And over those 10 years, oh my gosh, those things were just blown out of the water.
Mm-hmm.
And I just happened to be one of the family who actually lived in the Orchard Manor. I mean, because that's how the folks there brought me in as family. It just so happens I was a police officer,
Mm-hmm.
and so there were days that I would come home from work, and there would be Christmas cards taped to my door, and or the neighborhood kids would come and knock on my door and ask for my daughter to come out and play at the playground, and you know, but they treated her like a queen. But all those things are blown out of the water, and we created, or we actually not created, but we went back to those old school neighborhood norms where people wanted safety, people wanted to be able to walk at night and feel safe and have the perception of feeling safe, and that they embrace families, and so all those old school norms that were just so prevalent at the end of my time there in Orchard Manor, we wanted to replicate. So we approached the Greater Kanawha Valley Foundation, along with the Charleston Urban Renewal Authority, and you all were so gracious as to give us the funding for police officers to be able to buy homes. So we were each, I was one of the first officers granted. I was giving a grant for $50,000, 25 from the Greater Kanawha Valley Foundation, 25 from Cura, and I went to the 1500 block of 6th Avenue and I bought my home.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in a challenged neighborhood. Matter of fact, when I bought the home, it hadn't had running water for 5 years prior, and there were people living in the home.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. But there was drug dealing on the block. Lights were out. There was trash everywhere. Grass was up to your waist. And that was the neighborhood that I purchased my home in. And one of the things was come to that neighborhood and feel the pulse, feel what was needed, and be a resource to help get resources into, or things into that area to help to revitalize it. And to make a long story short, I moved in, I parked my police cruiser out front. That served as omnipresence, in which people thought the police were always in the area, and you could slowly see things get better, to the point where we are now, where it was funny because even today, everyone was just outside washing the car. It was such a beautiful day, but everyone was intermingling and talking and just, you know, being neighborly. And whereas those things didn't happen before on such a consistent basis. People pick up trash, people cut their grass at the same time, because we have pride in our neighborhood again. Every owner occupied home on our block has a surveillance camera. Those were some of the resources that because of grants that we received, such as from the Kanawha Valley Council on Philanthropy, allowed us to be able to do that. We created home safe and secure zones. And so people feel safe. Another great story of success on my block is there was a house that went up for sale. It was on the market for 3 days.
Oh, wow.
And one of the reasons why they moved here is because they said they love seeing that police car parked out in the street. And so I'm going to brag right now, because I'm going to tell you all right now, I have the best neighbors ever. and you know, we are a very diverse group of people, but we all have a common goal of having a neighborhood that's nurturing, that's great for raising kids, that's safe, and we take care of each other.
That's awesome. That is awesome. So you're certainly a community leader. When you think about leadership, Like, what are some of the skills, attitudes, behaviors that you had to learn or adopt to be such a good leader?
Wow. That's almost scary. What I'll say this. What's big for me is me personally is I have to stay humble. If I'm humble, I'm able to listen,
Mm-hmm.
and people will tell you everything you need to know if you're able to listen.
Mm-hmm.
If you're able to listen. And one thing that I do try to do with my role is I have access to certain resources. And as I listen to the different issues that are going on in the community, if I can connect some dots, and that's what I'm going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so that I think that's what has helped me be successful. And here's the other thing as well. Sometimes people just need a little boost.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. They're not just looking for handouts. They're not. Sometimes they just need a boost, a
Right.
different perspective. And that's what has happened in my neighborhood. And that's why we're one big family in the 1500 block of 6th Avenue.
It's awesome. Awesome. That's so as we wind down the conversation, think back to when you first started your career. What do you know now that you wished you knew back then?
Wow.
Like, what would you have done differently?
Wow. It's I wish I could say I had the emotional intelligence back then, but you're young
Right,
and
right.
but one thing I do again, I mentioned this earlier in our talk, was that I wish I had known what my levels of emotional intelligence were back then,
Mm-hmm.
because I could have really worked on in the areas where I was deficient. And again, it just would have helped me to become even more effective at an earlier age, and kind of avoid some of the pitfalls that I had gone into or experienced, because of sometimes my own ignorance. But if I could have had an awareness about my own emotional intelligence back then, wow, what a difference! So that's why I'm so excited about these guys and gals coming out of the academy now with that baseline.
That's awesome.
It's really going to help.
And you're always such a positive person. I don't think I've ever heard you whine and complain about anything. So what gives you hope? What makes you so positive and so hopeful about the future?
Um, I'm gonna give you a story. I work closely with corrections, and just about a week and a half ago, I had lunch with a gentleman that actually came to Charleston to participate in our program called the Grace Project, in which they came down to work on homes on the west side, actually on my block even.
Okay. Okay.
Working on facade projects, kind of beautify painting and cutting brush and
Mhm.
painting fences and so to see and to build a relationship and see guys and gals that are behind prison and have that perspective to be able to draw from, and then see them come out and be successful. That is
Mhm.
you cannot put a price on that.
Right.
And it's something that I really, really appreciate having experienced. And so with that, that is something I'm going to move forward with from here on out, is to
Mhm.
take that experience and the community, the beloved community. I want to achieve that too. That's what I want us to do.
Absolutely.
That
Absolutely.
includes everybody.
That includes
So
everyone.
to
Yeah.
have to sit across the table and have lunch with him once he was paroled, and we break bread together,
Mm.
um, is probably one of the most rewarding things ever to experience.
That's right.
Considering what both of our backgrounds were. So
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. You're one police officer that's about kind of getting people back on the right track and not just, locking them up and throwing away the key, but just figuring out how to, because most of them are coming back home, right? So it's kind of, we got to figure
90% of
out,
them. That's
yeah,
right.
you've got to figure out how to, weave them back into the community. So
Yeah, not for us to let our unconscious biases
right.
not allow them to change.
That's right. That's right.
So
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Errol. Appreciate you. And thank you for sharing on fostering solutions. And I wish you all the best in
thank you
your
so
future
much.
endeavors.
It's an honor. Thank you.
All righty. Take care.
Bye-bye.